Dr. Michieka, the screen is yours.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for having me today. And I appreciate all the folks who've joined us for this interactive session. So just to give you a plan of what we're going to do is we'll spend the first maybe half an hour, talking a little bit about some of the work we've done at the center. And then towards the end, we're going to open this up and have a discussion. And I'll be so happy to hear from what all of you have. So hopefully you're all able to see my screen. And if you have questions, please take those. We'll take those towards the end and have a great discussion. I'll start by talking a little bit about myself, just so that you know who I am. I currently work in the Department of Economics at Cal State Bakersfield. And as Dr. Lindsay talked about, I'm also the director for the Center of Economic Education and Research. I got my undergraduate degree in engineering in Nairobi, Kenya, and I got my master's in public administration out in East Stroudsburg, Pennsylvania, and then got my doctoral work at West Virginia University. Then moved to the wonderful Bakersfield, and been here done work in energy and environmental economics. We've spent some time soliciting funds. We've brought in about 1.2 million in research funding. We've had a lot of students work on research projects, and our collaborators are from all over. We've worked with folks across the US in different institutions. We've also worked with folks out in the EU, also have some co-authors in Africa, in Kenya, and we work with industry, think tanks, and government. So let's get this started. So here's the overview of the presentation. I'll give you a background of why this is an important topic, and we'll also give some experience with some of the research work that we did. We worked on a study. It was very research-oriented, and we got a chance to interact with some folks out in industry. So I'll kind of talk a little bit about that. And then towards the end, we'll bring it all together and have a discussion and ask what are some of the challenges that you're facing in collaboration or in collaborating with other people. Now, our audience. I come from an economics department, and some of the work that we do may be weighed towards economists, but we have some folks from the CRB featured cohort. So that's fantastic. Thank you so much for joining us. We have folks from academics, or academia. We have folks from industry. We have folks from government, and it's a very multidisciplinary group. And then we have individuals who've been in the field for a long time, like me, who've been there maybe 12 years or more. And we have others who are just getting started. So I'm going to tailor this conversation to fit all these individuals. It's not easy, but I'll kind of do what I can make happen here. So the main thing we're trying to do is this: how can researchers and policy professionals work together when tackling similar issues? So the first thing we need to understand is, what are the challenges in incorporating research in the policy making decision? Because you have two entities here. You have folks who work in research, and then you have the policymakers. And in economic fashion, we look at it from a supply and demand side, okay? From the supply side, you have researchers who work in the field, and they want to improve their findings. They want to improve the way they disseminate their work and the quality of how they interact with policymakers, because they want people to hear, this is what we found. And then on the demand side, you have policymakers who are concerned. Now, they also have other goals, but some of these include achieving quick and effective ways to come up with policies to solve issues that we face in the world today. So it's a demand and supply problem. So let's look a little bit about the supply side. The supply side, academics or researchers, industry, those who are working in government, those who are working in academic institutions. Some of us probably want to do a better job of understanding how the policy field works, and understand how that world works. We also have some challenges with accessing data in solving some of these issues that face the world today. And also, as researchers, I struggle with this all the time. We come up with all these great solutions, but in communicating some of these things out there, we may not be, as good as we should be. So these are just some of the supply side challenges that face researchers. So there is the group on this side. Let's now look at the other side and look at the demand side. Policymakers are usually, obviously, they're very busy. They have limited time and limited resources, right? Second thing is they sometimes need a little bit more resources, right? There's all this research that's coming out So you need staff, you need folks, you need editorial staff to read some of these things and sort them out. And actually, some of this work is usually written in, in scientific terms or in jargon. So you need folks to decipher some of that work and bring it all together. And also on the policy side, you have all these findings on a particular topic, and you may find some policymakers use some of the findings selectively and pick this over those other ones. So those are some of the challenges on the demand side. So what has actually happened is we have the research side of things, which is on your left side of the screen, and then policy all the way on the right. And in between, you have this avenue for sharing these ideas. So this brings policy and research together. This can happen at conferences. You have think tanks that work on some really cool put together seminars to bring these groups together. We have consultants who try to flesh out some of these issues and simplify them for the general public to understand. And then you have CRB Nexus all the way at the bottom, right? Which is what I'll talk about, which is why we're here and some of the work that it does. I missed the third bullet point or the fourth one, but one solution on how to get these two entities working together is sometimes have researchers lend or spend some of their times with policymakers and some of those institutions. So those are some of the ways in which you can have flow of conversation and flow of information across those two entities. So CRB Nexus now has public researchers. In fact, what these researchers do is, I'm going to focus on the red part at the bottom. They work with public policy makers, some really great work. They build and evaluate public policy programs, they inform policy, and they advocate for change. So this is what CRB Nexus does. And I'm now diving into what this presentation is all about. So I've just talked about what the relevance of this presentation is and what we're trying to do. We're trying to bridge the conversation between those two individuals, the researchers and the policymakers on both sides. So the rest of the presentation will go as follows. First, we're going to see how to navigate overlapping research, right? And what I'll do is I picked a study that we worked on, and here it's a golf study, and talk about how some of the work that we did overlapped, or how we got conflicting findings, or the findings that we found were not consistent with what's out there, and some of the reasons why. Then we'll see how to reconcile all these findings, and then assess, now move into, how do we look at the credibility of some of the work that's being done out there? And finally, we're going to see how to collaborate in policy and research. So these 4 topics are the ones that we're going to focus on, but I'll break down everything down to, about 5 to 7 minutes each, and then we'll get to the bottom of all of that cool stuff. If you have questions, please write as we go along. So let's start off with the first part, which is how to navigate overlapping research and then bringing these findings together. We worked on a topic here in the Central Valley, right? And it started off with golf, right? Some of the questions that we ask here is golf a declining sport, right? That is a question that has been asked, right? Over the last couple of years, now this study was published about 2 years ago, but at the time when we're looking at this, there were about 800 golf courses which had been closed. There was a time when we had, a significant number of golf courses which were being closed. The number of people who play golf reduced, right? It went from 24 million to about 23.8 million. Equipment sales have been tanking, and stores have also been cutting space in this field, or the space that they use or that they dedicate to selling golf equipment. So golf has been going through some challenges, right? Nationwide. Now, this has also been driven by the supply of golf courses, right? A lot of the new developments that come up typically sometimes have a golf course. And, if you're doing this a lot, then you have an oversupply of golf courses. It outpaced demand. Young players are not as into golf as they would be. And then the sport also takes a long time to learn, right? And there are a lot of other economic drivers that have seen this shift in the golf industry. So these are some things that had happened. Now, in Kern County here in Bakersfield, we had a point where we had some closures of golf courses, right? And these are some of the articles that were out there. There was Kern Valley Golf Course, which was closing. We had Sandale, we had Rio Bravo. For those of you who are in the region, you probably know what I'm talking about. Some of these have since been saved and are back. But there was a time when golf courses were, those are a big risk. So one of the questions that we said was, okay, now when you shut down these golf courses, what does that do to the community, right? There are a lot of interesting topics or really interesting things that happen. Well, typically communities can lose, you don't have a golf course, you can't play golf anymore. You have to travel a little bit out there to play golf. Secondly, a lot of golf courses are being replaced with housing developments, right? Especially in regions. I remember some of the articles that were looking at the East Coast where there's, like in New Jersey, you could see some of the golf courses were being shut down and were putting housing developments. In other places, golf courses were being shut down and they were repurposing these golf courses, putting out dog parks and skate parks and some of these event spaces. And then some just don't do anything, right? When golf courses, nothing happens. You just leave it, and over time it can become an eyesore. So these are some of the challenges that are facing regions that are faced with closing golf courses. So now we asked the question, all right, good. Now, because we're working on some of these, we had some research assistants who are working on this. We said, let's look at a study and ask ourselves, does having a house close to a golf course impact the value of that house, right? And that's what the question we asked, right? Does proximity to a golf course raise the value? If it does, then there are all these other things that are connected. Well, we can raise revenue. The city can come in and say, well, this is a good thing. It's a positive thing. And we said, let's just do that. Let's do the study. In fact, how? So there are a couple of things we have to think about. When you have a golf course close to your house, there are positive amenities and there are disamenities, okay? We've got to think about that. One, in terms of amenities, you're close to recreation, right? You can play golf. The attractive views, there are all these ecological benefits. You have birds, you have all these amazing views. But then the challenge is you can have traffic congestion, you can have some pollution, right? These folks are out there playing golf all the time. They come to play. I play it sometimes, and it's amazing. You gotta be there early, right? If you don't want to get the 100-degree or 90-degree weather. Challenges also involve water pollution, groundwater pollution, pesticide use, and all those other things. So these amenities and disamenities can kind of cross each other out. So we said, okay, let's do this study and let's ask ourselves, first of all, when we're looking at a house. Now remember, let me backtrack a little bit. We're looking at the impact of having a golf course right next to a house, right? And we're looking at amenities and disamenities. So before we find out, how golf impacts that, we got to ask ourselves, and maybe you guys can answer this, what physical characteristics impact a home? Why would you pay more for a house, right? What would drive you to pay a little bit more, right? I mean, talk to realtors and they'll say, you got to get your kitchen, right? People love good kitchens. You got to get the driveway or, the garage or the outside, the paint, all these interesting things. But as economists, I'll put this little thing right there and says, people will pay more for extra bedrooms. They'll pay more for an extra bathroom. And you got to be careful. You got to be sure whether it's a full bathroom or half bathroom. Is your house at a corner lot, right? Is it at a corner lot? Probably have more space. Is it at a cul-de-sac? The cul-de-sac where people do U-turns, right? Probably have more space for parking. Is it close to a cemetery? How does the cemetery impact the value? And then we said, okay, let's add a golf course and see whether that will raise the value or lower the value. And I've put dots on that because there are very many other reasons that, that could impact the value. Is it close to a highway? Is it close to a school? Is it close to a mall? All those other cool things. Before you do a study of this nature, one thing you want to do is got to read the literature. What I'll do is I'm going to put 3 slides here that are going to show you past studies and show you how interesting this work can get when you study how proximity to a golf course will impact the value of the house. But I just want to show you how interesting things. So I'll start off from 1995 and go down to 2022, 23. So some studies found that, yes, golf courses will raise the value. And one thing, actually, I'm going to go back here because I got to get your attention. When we presented this, people asked, well, if you have a golf course close to your house, the value will go up. And the question I asked is, by how much, right? Is it $5? Is it $500? Is it 5%? Is it 2? We need a numerical value. We need to quantify that value, okay? So that's the cool thing. That's what we're looking for here. So some of the studies found that some people will pay 7.6% more of the home, or rather the golf courses add a 7.6% premium to the value of the house. But one thing I want you guys to kind of focus on, look at the middle column, look at the area, and then look at the findings, okay? So these are different studies done at different places at different times, finding different results. All those things come together, okay? So for example, in Seabrook Island in South Carolina, lot values increased by 39% for a golf course view. Lot, empty lots, not houses, empty lots, okay? If you look at Oregon, the value varied by how far out you are from the golf course, right? You're within 1,500 feet, you experience an 8,000 increase in the sales price of the house, okay? I'm going to bring up another slide. It's going to have a table like this with much more data, but it's really cool, okay? Sales price increases by 1,500 feet to a golf course, right? In Las Vegas, very interesting. It depends on the type of golf course that's right next to your house. Is it private? Is it public? Is it semi-private, right? All those have different premiums on the value of your home. In Greenville, South Carolina, they found that it just increases the value. And then if we go down to Knoxville, Tennessee has some really awesome findings, fantastic findings. In fact, I'm going to click next here and say that I'll start here. This one I'll start from the bottom because I talked about Tennessee. In Tennessee, people would prefer to have open spaces. They prefer agricultural land to golf course developments, right? And that's what that's what the findings or the studies found. And then in the last, if you look at the last row all the way at the bottom, in 4 out of 10 counties, golf courses increased home value. In 5 counties, there was no change, right? Golf courses had no impact, right? And then in 1 county, there was a decrease in the value. Now, if I start going up on that slide and going up that way, you'll find that some places like South Carolina, at least during this period, they found that proximity to a golf course had no impact on home values, okay? So there was a study also in Fresno there, which found very interesting results. It said that the impact of a golf course on a home varies on whether the economy is booming or it's not booming, okay? So during boom and bust periods, you have different sets of findings, right? So you can see how things are getting very interesting here as we look more and more into this work. And in some studies, they looked at the sales price of the house. In some studies, they looked at the appraised value of the home, right? Those are 2 different values, right? So all those findings are now becoming quite interesting. And remember, the word here I'm saying is overlapping, right? The word here is overlapping research. Okay, let's keep it moving. So we did this study, said let's collect data. We got together with about 4 or 5 students, we collected data for about 1,700 homes. That was the median price. And on average, houses stayed on the market for about 40 days. That was in Kern County. Ran our studies, and then these are some of the results we found. So we found that each additional bedroom increases the value of the house by 7.2%. Each additional bathroom increases the value by 14%. If your house is at a cul-de-sac, the value goes up by 5%. And then if it's next to a golf course, there's an 11.7% increase in premium of the home, okay? So that's what our findings were. And also, when we looked at other things, there was no impact of having your house close to a cemetery. There was no impact of having your house at a corner lot. There was no impact of having your house at the park, or the days on market did not impact our value. So that's what we did for our study, and that's what we found. Now, our results, we presented these results. Some of these results were actually out in the paper. So the local paper had this is about 2019, and we got quite some feedback from real estate agents, as you would expect, right? So you have researchers on one end, you have folks in the industry on the other end. Some appraisers had some really interesting questions, right? But before I get to that, the work was put out in the paper. We published the material, and this was published about 2 or 3 years ago. And then we had to now justify, so where do our findings lie? So we kind of find that our study was about, it's right in the middle of all of these papers. So we found that on average, we have an 11.7% premium for our findings. And the contribution of our literature was we used some spatial models, and then we focused on Kern County. We used recent data at the time. It was a big thing. And then we got very mixed results. You know, people sent emails, people had all these comments, and you'd run to people and they say that, well, these are the type of findings that you'd put out there, and someone would come and say, you know, whatever. Anyway, so to make a long story short, hopefully I've kind of put you guys through an interesting scenario of where we had some overlapping research. And this research had, well, when I say overlapping, I say that our study had some specific findings, but we had to follow a certain set of rules which worked for our study. And the choice of the variables that we used were unique to our study. The region that we focused on was unique. The time period we focused on was unique. Our findings were different. Of course, we used distance from the square footage, distance from the golf course, and also our dependent variable at the time was home value or appraised value. So we had to come out very, very clear in what we were trying to do and what our findings were at the time for this particular study. So what are the takeaways here in navigating overlapping research? One, if there's similar work out there, well, first of all, you got to be open and say, this is what we found and this is what's different from the other findings. But overlapping research is a really good thing. It just means that, one, there are a lot of authors who are working on a similar topic, or there's an interesting topic here that has opportunities for collaboration, right? We also learned that, one, it's being transparent is a good thing, it's important. And then the third thing is it's important to report all findings, right? And summarize findings to the table, provide the data set that we're using, have that as an appendix or an attachment. And then we also have to state the contribution of our work. How is our work very different from the other studies out there or the pre-existing work? So that's kind of an overview of how we did this work and how we had to address what we had done with what was out there with the community. Now, the next part, we'll say, okay, now that we've done this, remember this presentation had 4 parts. One is how to navigate overlapping research. And then the second one is now there's the research. Okay, you got to figure out how to navigate that. But then you also got to look at the other research and ask yourself, is the research that we're working with credible? Okay, is this something that we can actually compare with or work with? So I have a slide here that has words again, okay, but it's awesome, okay? Here we go. So the first thing, to assess research credibility, you've got to focus on some of these things. In other words, if you're looking at a research article or a paper or a report, right, this is empty, so don't worry. The first thing you got to ask yourself is the work recent, right? Or the topic that you're looking at, is it recent? Because you can have some work that was done about 4 or 5 years ago, and you have some newer studies that update what was done. So you got to look at that. One, is it recent? Two, you got to look at the work and ask yourself, is this work relevant? Is it written at the scholarly level? Are we looking at, the right tools that were used to do this, to answer this type of question or to do this type of analysis? Third is also a quick search of who wrote the article is very important. Remember, the question is this work credible? Can we trust this work, right? Do a quick Google search on the authors and find out what their affiliation is, find out what their background is. You can find out if they've worked on similar topics. And that'll kind of tell you where you're headed with this author. Accuracy, okay? I'm looking at accuracy. I should have put numbers on this, right? We keep learning every day, but accuracy is that down there. Do our findings align with other studies, right? Of course, if you find some very compelling results, then you can ask a few questions. There's probably a reason why those findings are that way, but these are something that you want to ask. Methodological rigor, right? Is the analysis or the method of analysis used, is it sound? Is it well justified? Are there different methods that could have been used? What are other studies doing when addressing that similar topic? And then you also got to ask, why are people doing this study? What's the purpose of this article? When we worked on the golf study, I believe we were inquisitive and we were interested in looking at, we had a genuine issue. We're looking at what was going on in Kern County with regards to golf courses. But there's some studies which may have a biased drive to what they're doing. So you want to look at who's funding the work, why are they funding the work, what are they trying to tell, us with this study. And then transferability. The models that were used, the data that was used, or the approach that was used, can it be taken and extrapolated and used for a different study area, right? If you can do that, then you have some credibility towards the work. And then finally, you can also look at the data and ask yourself, can we or can one person replicate the data, right? Very, very interesting, especially because replication is becoming a very it's growing. It's a growing field. There are replication journals, and it's actually pretty cool if you can take some of this work and try and reproduce the findings that were done. So are you able to do that, or are there things that prevent you from being able to do that? Those are the questions that you want to ask. Replicability. Now, this list is not exhaustive, right? There are very many other things to look at, but these are some of the main ones that are found across the literature when putting this presentation together. So these are some of the ways you can assess the credibility of the research. Now, let's ask our questions. Once we got the research, let's look at how to collaborate. And what I'll do is this statement here has where and how to collaborate, right? So the first question I'll answer is where, or where to find collaborators. And then the second one is how to collaborate, okay? So let's start off with the where, and that's why that looks as red. One, collaborating is very interesting. It costs time and money, right? You got to get out there. You got to put yourself out there to work with people. Conferences are amazing, right? There are local conferences, there are regional conferences, national, international. If you can afford those, that's amazing. Or you can get some resources or find a way to attend those. And the conferences are of different types. The academic, industry, there are mixed, you have government. All those are really, really interesting and great to work with. And then consistency matters, right? I did my undergraduate work in Jomo Kenyatta University, and then when I did my graduate work at West Virginia University, I worked on coal. Some of the work that I did was coal, and we were looking at how the coal industry works in China. But at the time, one thing that we strive to do is work with the advisor was to attend the same conferences, try to attend the same meetings over and over. Then you can kind of figure out who's doing what you're doing. And interestingly enough, at the time, nuclear was a big topic. So you had a lot of sessions at the conference that had folks working on nuclear energy. And then over time, you could tell that the funding for nuclear energy went down. And that was just by the number of participants who were working on nuclear energy. And the folks who were working on coal also kind of subsided, but those numbers again increased. So you can kind of work with these individuals. Once you start to see the same faces, the same people over and over again, then you can build a relationship with these individuals. So that's why I put there the word number 1, part 3, consistency matters. It's really, really important. And then number 4 is it's important also to find the right conferences, right? There are a lot of conferences out there. There's a lot of great work being done, and there's even a lot of greater work being done. Are you able to share your findings with individuals? Are you able to have conversations about this? Are you able to actually interact with participants? Some conferences are really, really big. Some are not as big. So you got to find a mix of where you actually get a chance to interact with individuals. So it's important to find the right conferences. Webinars, since the advent of Zoom, it has made, I don't know whether it's a good thing or a bad thing. There are now webinars all over the place. And there's the face-to-face interaction that we used to have, but now we have all these webinars to pick from. There's one here, there's one there, there's one. So take advantage of those. Try to, if you're working on a particular area, get into that and try and figure out who's doing what. Social networks are amazing, right? Get on, a Substack, Blue Sky, Facebook, right? Facebook. People say Facebook is for people who are working, right? It's not the new thing. It's not TikTok or whatever. But all these avenues have a lot of individuals working on some really interesting work. And then also AI. AI is amazing, right? You can use AI to find collaborators. And then finally, number 5 is, of course, events. I try to attend events, even galas, or if there's a cleanup event somewhere or there's a marathon, you might be able to find someone who's working on some really cool work that also is part of what you do. And then also journals. Act as a reviewer, have some, schemes through some of this work, and then just write an email and just check what happens. The worst, someone will say is no, and then you try and reach out to the next person. So those are some of the ways that you can where to find collaborators. Let's now look at how to collaborate. So now you find people. Okay, yay! Bunch of us want to work on something really cool. Can work on some grant-funded projects. This is quite interesting because a lot of the funding agencies today are looking to fund multidisciplinary work, right? People working in different fields across different departments. You have folks who are very, who've been at the university of who have a lot of experience in the work that they do. Some who are just coming in. So grant-funded projects are a good way to collaborate. It also gets you together if you're forced to work together and you're forced to get something and deliver something, which is really, really great. Because once that happens, then you can do that over and over. Interestingly now, the people that I'm doing these grant-funded projects with are people that I met in grad school in 2009, 10, 11. I met them, said hi to them. I didn't think I was ever going to work with them. And now they're the only people that I reach out to all the time. I'm like, hey, there's some cool work here that we can work on. And same thing. So it's very, very interesting. But we become very good friends because of that. How to collaborate, writing. Writing is also great. Of course, some folks are amazing to work with. Some are a little bit challenging to work with, but you learn a lot, and putting out papers and newspaper articles or reports is a great thing. And then in terms of collaboration in research across disciplines is quite tricky. There need to be a little bit more incentives, because if you're at a university, so I'll focus now a little bit on those of us who are in the colleges, on the universities. You may not be rewarded very much for, or rewarded as much as you'd want to be rewarded for multidisciplinary work. Some of these journals are they're not the easiest to find. Some of this multidisciplinary work is not easy to justify, or there could be bureaucracies working across departments. So those could be some barriers that could deter collaboration. So finding ways to incentivize multidisciplinary work, I believe, could be a great way to make things actually happen. So finding those barriers and breaking them, or finding ways to work through them, would be really great. And then costs. So I'm here in Bakersfield right now. Maybe there's someone who's working on some really great work out in Norway or somewhere in Nairobi, Kenya, and we want to collaborate. So the distance is a thing, right? Distance can be a challenge. So again, Zoom is a good way to get things started. You can have Zoom coffee. I usually have Zoom coffee with folks. It's a little bit interesting, but it's cool. You get a chance to talk, or you can just travel there and try to get, some ways to move out there, or not move rather, but go out there, work with these individuals and put some projects together. And I believe working across departments. So these are just some ways. Now, as this presentation goes, please take some notes, and let's talk about this towards the end, right? I'm sitting here in this room. You guys are wherever you are. I'm yelling at a screen, but I don't know what's going on the other end. But I hope that we can have a conversation at the end. So I put dots there just because I would love to hear what everyone else thinks about how to collaborate, ways on where and how to collaborate as well, okay? AI has become a very popular tool these days, right? Few things about AI. It is very interesting. In fact, there's a paper out there that talks about how AI, has done all these amazing things. And I think in this paper, they were prompting AI and they were talking back and forth, or having a conversation with AI. And the main thing they were trying to do was, how can we use AI to do research? It can do a ton of things, right? It can synthesize a ton of literature. You can get some literature reviews. It can identify research gaps, come up with a research hypothesis, do some experimental designs, come up with great methodologies and some statistical analysis. All these things are great, and they are quite indispensable tool for researchers. Saved us a lot of time. I believe those of us who worked on lit reviews, the amount of time we used to spend, and now they're quite quick ways to do some of these things. So it can be used in research. We know that, right? And it can also be used to collaborate. Say, for example, you're looking at a topic, and it's a topic that maybe affects a wide range of fields. So there are engineers who speak very differently about the topic that you're working on. You have folks in computer science, you have economists, you have psychologists, chemists. You can use AI to kind of bring all this content together and come up with a question or a research question. So it can bridge communication across disciplines and it can also be used to collaborate. So I'm bringing this here because I know AI is becoming more and more, useful as a tool for researchers, and I think it's important for us to really talk a little bit about how to use it to collaborate as well, right? So there's a lot of positive that can come out of this. So the other thing about AI, we also got to be careful, is that what AI produces, right, comes from patterns of data. So if you're working off something that's very recent or very new, it takes a while before AI catches up on that. And then the second thing is that some of the data or some of the work that you may be looking at will end, where there's a cutoff date for what the AI has, right? And then it also has a shallow initial learning curve. So the paper there by Rice has some really great insights on how AI can be used to collaborate. But it's also important, once you get AI and you use it, it's important to fact check, right? And assess and ask yourself a couple of questions, right? Are the studies I'm working on, are they, you got to consult and ask yourself this, is this work that I'm citing, is it appropriate? Is it correct wherever I got it from? You can also seek expert opinions from individuals. You can use fact-checking websites. We've seen that a lot these days with the news and the radio. And then you can also participate in online forums. You can go to the web and find out, I found this study, is it okay? Is it, is it appropriate? What are your thoughts? And then finally, you can also check for recent updates on some of the work that you do. That's the story with AI. And I believe with all the work that we do, it's important to acknowledge that we've used AI in our work, right? I think that's the thing. It's just the one thing. Did you use AI in this? Yes. Did you use AI in this? Yes. But that brings a paradox, okay? And this is called the paradox of disclosure. Does disclosing the usage of AI compromise trust in the user? If I was to say that I wrote this amazing paper, but I used some AI in it, what does that have? Does it erode the trust from supervisors or professors or analysts or folks who are doing creative work? If I'm putting out some creative, if I'm doing art or music or movies, does my disclosure actually probably erode some of that? Does it water down? That was an interesting paper that I came across, and this was published in earlier this year, right? And there's a transparency dilemma because one, AI is helpful, and you gotta acknowledge it. But then is my acknowledgement and my use of AI going to dilute some of my trust? Well, the findings in this study show that there is some tendency for trust to be eroded, but only for individuals who have not used AI, right? So individuals who've used AI, individuals who've worked with AI are quite familiar with what it does, so that has no impact on them. But those who are still new to the field or new to all that, it's a bit different. So that's the paradox of disclosure, right? Is this something that we can do or not? And I want to start ending here and kind of hear what you guys have, right? In the 20 minutes that we have left. So what we've done, this is just a summary of what we've done. One, we've looked at overlapping research and reconciling findings, and I gave an example of how we worked with the Gulf study. Two, how do we assess research credibility? And then the third one is we need to assess how to collaborate and where to collaborate with the research policy, okay?
I want to thank you so much. I feel like this scratched the surface on many different topics within the collaboration, especially because